I was a very average young girl and really had very few aspirations because I was reminded most of the time that I was pretty ordinary. And so, as I grew, I got more interested in several things and some of my painful shyness disappeared. And my father was able to send me to college. I went to a small college in Pennsylvania, a business major at my father's insistence. Women did not become doctors at that time. They became nurses, they became secretaries, and they became teachers. And I was offered one of those. So I went to college at Bucknell, and my father suggested I be a business major with a secretarial minor. My mother was very helpful. She was a stay-at-home mom and a good mother, a very good mother. And she cared about us and our healthy eating and exercise, which I loved about her, that she liked us to exercise. But she also encouraged anything I want to do. She said, "Ellen, you can do anything." And I said, really? Dad, though, on the other hand, was devil's advocate. "There are no women doctors in this family and you're not going to be one." And I said, "Watch me." The second semester of my first year, I took Biology 101, and that did it. I was reminded of what I wanted to be when I was 13, and I went from there. And I never stopped. And I've never regretted that decision in my entire life. There were two breaks that occurred in my career. Number one, getting into medical school. I was one of the 4%ers. From 1901 to 1965, and it didn't change over the time, only 4% of medical school graduates were female. So the break was, the interview went well. I knew the questions were coming. Why did I want to take the place of a man? What was I going to do when I had babies? And I had to come up with answers to those that were reasonable. Like one, I didn't want to have babies because I didn't have a boyfriend. And two, I wasn't taking a man's place, I was taking mine. And it seemed to work, and I got in. With a lot of help from my two roommates, who were female, 4 of us managed to graduate out of class of '88. And so that was my first big break. I was on my way. Second big break was after finishing residency and fellowship, I had to look for a job. And I looked for a job in San Francisco, and the answer was, "We don't hire women." It was universal. Everywhere I went, "We don't hire women." Now, all the men in my fellowship class had a job, but myself and one other woman were having difficulties getting a job. So fortunately, I decided to apply at Kaiser in Richmond, which was the original Kaiser Hospital, and it serviced the shipyard workers. Through Henry Kaiser, he established his own hospital and health clinic. It was first HMO, or Health Maintenance Organization. So they needed a warm body, and they didn't care what gender I was, and so I was hired as a cardiologist in this very small hospital. When I say small, it was less than 1 city block on 1 floor. But Kaiser let me have my head, if you will. They didn't interfere, they didn't tell me how to practice, they didn't tell me what I could do. They just kind of gave me free rein. And I found I wasn't too bad. I was actually a pretty good cardiologist. We worked looked like a MASH hospital without a tent. We didn't have much in the way of supplies, and we put in pacemakers, and we did a lot of things together. And finally, we're able to convince the other parts of the bigger Kaisers and the big bosses that we deserved more. So we began to get things. We began to get treadmills. We began to get pacemakers. We began to get all kinds of things that when I first went there weren't there. There wasn't even a coronary care unit. So we got that slowly. Moved on to Kaiser Oakland, started teaching residents. I found my niche. I love teaching. So I guess that was the big break, getting an opportunity to go to UCSF and be a teacher and to teach at Kaiser. My niche was women and heart disease and electrocardiography. Those are the two things I liked the most. I wanted to be really good at both. And I noticed that in the literature, women didn't get the same care of men as men. Even women of color and men of color didn't get the same care as Caucasian men. And it was pretty clear, there were studies that showed that a woman would often get Valium for chest pain, and a man would get a complete cardiac workup. And I remember thinking of the word hysteria. Well, where does that word come from? Hyster, the uterus. That's why we women are hysterical. And it kind of bothered me. So I started looking into it, giving talks, trying to convince women that they should, learn how to talk to their doctor. And if they weren't getting what they wanted, to demand it. And I said, go in, be concise, don't babble on and on, don't ramble. Just tell them what you have and what you want. And that still goes on today. Not to the great degree as it did, but I gave talks through the country on women and heart disease, and mostly to men. And I said, pay attention, because once they get menopause, they're right at the same, risks as men, and they are. My favorite people were the nurses when I was in training. Without them, I've made so many mistakes. But they were old at this business, and they would just say, oh, doctor, relax, I'll start a big, large bore IV when the patient has no blood pressure. Good idea. Let's start a large, I depended on them through residency and fellowship. I depended on all the people I worked with, the echocardiogram techs, the EKG technicians. They were a team. And that teamwork was really predominant in the Kaiser system. I had support, and people said, go for it. There was I always felt less of a woman at Kaiser than I did previously. I felt supported, and so I could get things done. I'm an outdoors woman, always have been. To find a balance between the work in a hospital as a doctor and a married life, and to have some balance in your life, I found that I love doing sports. And so I met a man who liked doing sports as well. So things like sailing, riding horses, I got pretty good at that, 100 jumpers when I was young. And I found that if I faced my fears, I would really found things I loved to do. That I was a scaredy cat, and I was no more. And so flew an airplane, couldn't stand flying, so I decided to take flying lessons. I found my way through things. And sailing, when I got here to the Bay, skiing started in Denver and continued here, and then sailing started here, because we've got this magnificent bay. Sailed a boat to Kauai. That was an adventure. It was just, I think I found this balance between I love camping and backpacking and we've got mountains, we've got the sea, we've got everything here. So the move to California was a big, big boon for me. My mentors in medical school really inspired me. And in a situation where we women were pretty much hated by the male students, our mentors, the surgeons, the internists, they paid attention to us more than the students did. And they were so helpful. One gentleman who was the chief of medicine had a heart attack and called me to his home when he was recovering. It used to take 6 weeks to recover from heart attacks then. He was sitting out by his pool in his robe and slippers, and he said to me, Miss Killebrew, I think you shouldn't do what you're planning to do. And I said, what's that? He said, you're doing a mixed internship, half pediatrics, half internal medicine. He said, don't do that. He said, the pediatricians won't think you're serious and the internists won't think you're serious. He said, pick one or the other. He said, pick medicine. And I did. My legacy is for my students. I've been teaching since 1973 at UCSF and at Kaiser Oakland until 2010. And they're just wonderful. They're young, they're impressionable, they're not biased, and they're not jaded, not yet. And they listen and they learn. And I'm teaching students still at the General, and I love them. In a broad sense, don't go into medicine for the money. Go into medicine because you have a passion. You have to have the passion to make it. Go in there because you really, truly want to try and learn enough about the human body and keep learning to help people. And listen to them. Listen, please. Don't turn your head to the computer. And don't forget to do a physical examination, because that's how you do it. You listen to the patient, they tell you where to look. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, but you've got help. and they tell you, and you ask questions. If they're reticent, say, well, now tell me when this started and what makes it better, what makes it worse, what do you think? And then just say, here's what I think, what do you think we should do here? And then do a complete physical based on their symptoms. And that goes a long way and saves money. Instead of doing a shotgun approach of let's order every test on the planet, you know what to order. I think I'd like to be remembered as someone who was kind, was generous with my time, and cared, truly cared. I don't want to be thought of as someone who was false or in it for some other reason than the reason we're supposed to be in it.